You're listening to Worshipology with Curtis Parks, a biblical, practical, and spiritual conversation about living and leading worship. Let's lean into today's episode.
Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us for the Worshipology podcast. This is a podcast, a conversation geared towards worship leading, worship teams, musicians, and today I'm sitting in the studio in Baltimore, Maryland, across the table from Tyler Buisch, music director. What would you call your role here at Mosaic Church?
Yeah, I'm the music director. Mm-hmm.
Music director. So this guy, the first time we played together, now I've been leading worship coming up here, back and forth from Nashville first, then back and forth from Richmond now. And the first time I think we played together, you were on electric guitar.
Probably.
I came back, you were on drums.
Yeah.
Then my third time you were on keys, and I was like, wait a minute, this guy's a freak. Like, is there an instrument you don't know how to play?
I know how to play a lot. I'm a nerd. I'm a big nerd.
Dude, so this time I'm really excited this conversation because most of our podcasts up to this point have been with worship artists and songwriters. But really, in the world of worship, there's not many teams right now that don't have an MD, somebody that's really putting it all together from the music side, working with bands and musicians.
Yeah.
So, Tyler, I'm excited for this conversation, dude. For our listeners, just maybe share a little bit of your story. How'd you get involved in music and, in particular, worship?
Yeah, I did not grow up playing music. I have a weird story. I didn't get into music until I was in 11th grade.
Oh, wow.
I was just at a friend's house. He had a drum set. I sat down. For some reason, it was fairly natural for me to figure it out. And I just took it super seriously. I took lessons from a guy around here that was a pro drummer. And I loved, I'm just wired just like my dad. I'm very hand-eye coordinated and I love details.
Yeah.
And so music is just a great avenue for that. And so practiced like crazy. I ended up only after 2 years of practicing, I was like, I think I want to study music.
Wow.
And my parents were like, you sure about that?
As every parent says to their young musicians.
I know. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I love you. I'm going to do it. So I studied music, a bachelor's in jazz drums performance. And,
wow.
And then I got a minor's in education. And then, so fresh out of college, I went to the church I always grew up in. They had a private Christian school and they were a church. So I was a music director. Well, really, I was a worship leader. And then the music director, and then I taught in schools. It was so much work.
Wow.
It's like I worked 7 days a week.
Wow.
A little too much.
Yeah, that's a little bit.
Then I ended up leaving that church, and dude, this is the story I wanted to tell you about.
Yeah.
This is wild. So Elevation Worship back in the day, remember there was their Only King Forever album came out.
Wow.
And what was
Great
that,
record. 2000,
I don't remember what year, it was probably 12.
12, 13, yeah.
And I was like, who is this church?
Yeah.
It's like rock and roll.
Yeah.
And I love the album. And then that was my first introduction to Stephen Furtick. I was like, who is this? So I was like, whoa, this man is screaming at me. So I was super into their music, and they tweeted out one day. They were like, hey, we're holding auditions. And I was like, I'm going to go.
Wow.
So, I sent my videos is what I did. I sent my videos. I sent it in I actually made this video. I have it. I'll have to send this to you on YouTube.
I want to see it.
I played everything, and
at the same time.
It was one of those things that had all the squares, and then I sang. I did Exalted One. Nice. In the midst of the darkness, you're the light. And so they called me back and said they want me to come in on drums and bass.
Wow. After
that video, so I was like, okay, and they were like, and that audition is in 2 weeks. I was like, oh wow, in person, and I was in Maryland. I didn't think they knew that I was from out of town. I didn't think they knew how big they were, though, too.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. And so I was in the process of leaving that school and church. So I interviewed in Montgomery County Public Schools, literally walked out of the building, undid my tie, and drove 7 hours down to Charlotte.
No way.
Matthews campus, did drum audition in person, bass audition in person. And they had these series of questions they asked. They were like, what campus are you currently at? What other serving teams are you in? And I was like, no, I drove down here from Maryland. And they were, what do you mean?
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean, what do I mean? I drove down here to further.
I saw a tweet.
Yeah, that was it.
That's crazy.
I didn't get on the team, and they were like, yeah, you don't go here. I was like, okay, I guess that was weird. So I emailed them, and I was like, is there a church that does what you do? Because I was in the hallways. I met this girl that was fresh out of rehab, loves Jesus.
Wow.
Was Elevation, I'm saying Mosaic. Elevation was a safe place for her to get plugged in, serve. And I was meeting all these lost people. Lives changed.
Wow.
And I was like, is there a church in Maryland that has great music, great ministries, excellence, and reaches lost people. And
Yeah.
they're like, we got a church for you, Mosaic Christian Church.
Wow.
And so I went on their website, and they were hiring a music person. I was like, wow, look at this.
That's kind of cool.
Audition, they told me no.
You're kidding.
They told me no.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't care. Can I like serve here?
Yeah.
So it was like one of those
Now,
things.
see, that's a really good mentality. Like, okay, I didn't make the team. Instead of getting jaded,
Yeah.
you said, okay, I want to serve here. Mm-hmm. That's big time. Keep going, man.
Yeah, so I was in the service, and I was like, all this makes sense about like lighting and production and distraction free. And I grew up in a church that they didn't really care about production, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I cared about it, and so I was just like, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. And these songs are modern. Not that modern is better, but like these songs are relevant. It's like what people are listening to. And then and the preaching was great, and I was like, I want to audition. And so I was told no, but I was like, I want to stay here if that's cool.
Wow.
And they were like, yeah, of course, we would love to have you. So I served, and while I was there, their music guy was let go, and so I was just like a key volunteer. And then they were like, hey, do you want to work here, actually? And I was like, actually, I can't.
Oh, so first you get turned down,
I
then it's
know.
like, well, I can't now.
It's a funny story if you ask the guys in charge here, because they were like, you told us no. I think they offered the job to me 3 times, and the 3rd time I took it.
Wow.
And so I've been attending here since 2015, but I started working here 2018, and I've been their MD ever since.
And I think we met in 2017. I was planting a church in Nashville before I moved. I met with Mike, the creative. He's like over creative here.
Yeah, now he's XP.
Yep, XP. And at the time, he was like, hey, we're contracting worship leaders. So it was a great thing for me to kind of, from Nashville back to this area, 45 minutes up the road from D.C. I could see my friends on a weekend. We'd worship here, get plugged in. And so we met back then. I've been coming up throughout the years. And it's just been so cool to kind of see the journey here. But really, to me, like your role is so pivotal in the growth of this team. And when it comes to the role of an MD, what does your week look like? And, you know, maybe we have somebody listening right now that's like, oh, I want to have an MD at our church, or maybe they are an MD and they're just trying to figure out, how do I get more balance here? Or there's somebody listening that's like, man, I kind of play a little bit of everything. Could this be a role for me? So talk to me a little bit about, what is your role as a music director at a fairly large church that is reaching the lost, you know, leading modern songs. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis throughout the week?
Yeah. So I have, it's hard for me to connect with other guys that work at churches, because my role, I have yet to meet someone that has the role that I do. Most people hire like a worship person up front singing. And I can lead worship. I always tell people, I'm a good singer, but I'm not a good worship leader. I'm not good at like what Trent did today. Curtis served. I mean, he was just so powerful. So were you. I can't do that.
Yeah.
I don't have that bone in my body. But I'm a hyper nerd. I love practicing. So I really like, in my private life and at work, like I just work all the instruments on stage I can play at a fairly competent level. Yeah. So I'm wired that way. So I can speak to those instruments. And so to get to your question, I build tracks and I create arrangements. I create basically the service flow in Ableton. We have a pretty locked in service flow. It's almost all on the grid, minus the sermon. I'm organizing my teams. I'm scheduling the teams. I definitely do like band instrument development, meet with them with lunches. I'm finding contractors. I'm scheduling contractors. I'm flying them in.
And that's something that's pretty unique to Mosaic, contracting worship leaders. And we can get to that in a moment, like just talking about how you have to be able to kind of flow from one style, one personality to the next person, because you do that so well. But yeah, so you guys pretty much contract the worship leader role.
Yeah, almost all of it, not 100%, but a lot of it, yeah.
Yep. And then as the MD, you're scheduling the songs, getting the band rehearsed, acclimating all the, tracks and everything like that.
Yeah.
You're running Ableton.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And so do you make your own tracks, or you do pretty much get them from, Multitracks or Loop Community, whatever that is?
We do a mixture of the two.
Okay.
Sometimes, most of it's multi-tracks, right? It's easy. It's great. Sometimes my pastor comes with me and he's like, I was at this conference. I loved this song. I'd love to do it. And they send me a YouTube video. And I go, well, the tracks aren't available. So usually what I do is me and my boy K-Mo, Christian, a keyboard player. Shout out to K-Mo. Look him up on Spotify. He's great at mixing and producing. And so I'll lay down drums, strings, guitar, bass, and then I'll have K-Mo do the keys, and then I'll have a mixer master it. So That's not unusual for us.
Yeah.
Particularly, and we'll talk about this later, when we do specials, not all tracks are available for songs, radio songs, so we make them ourselves. And that becomes time consuming. I mean,
I bet.
$40 a multi-track, boom, you got a song. Or, 40 hours.
Wow.
Maybe not that much.
Yeah.
But it's a lot,
Hey, if you're doing it right.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild. So when you're putting together a set, and this is for, maybe somebody that's listening that they've never used Ableton, what's a good step into that world? I mean, a lot of places are running tracks or at least a click and a pad. What's a good step into that world where you're trying to audition more instruments and get more people involved, but also balance it with like the multi-tracks and like how do you decide what goes in, what doesn't go in? Is it like, hey, we're going to put everything in and then we're playing on top of that, or is it like a balance of like sonically, hey, it doesn't make sense to have this playing because we have that on stage?
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
Of course, that's a great question. And the first part you asked is like, because sometimes Ableton is a big hurdle, particularly if you're like not familiar with the DAW whatsoever, digital audio workstation. Is that what DAW stands
That's
for?
it.
But these companies like Loop Community and Multitracks have like a first tier thing. Like you can just run it on an iPad or a phone.
I've seen that, yeah.
Playback, I think is what it's called for Multitracks. And you can either rent, and you don't have to buy the songs, you can rent them. So it's like a low price point, and you just do a headphone out from an iPad or an interface, and you can just do click to one side and tracks to the other, and you can turn off. And I always tell people, like, if it really intimidates you, turn off everything.
Wow.
And just have the click and cue and maybe a pad. Because maybe your sound guy's not used to it too, right? You got to have the inputs.
Yeah.
And if it feels, a lot of people say it feels phony to them to like do tracks on stage, and I get that, but do something that just accents what you're already doing.
That's good.
Turn on just like 2 or 3 keys parts, percussion.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
As you feel more comfortable, add stuff. So when it comes to us, we have really competent sound guys, and we contract that position too. I mean, you think about it, that guy might be the most important person in the room to make everything happen.
Yeah, you could have an all-star band, but if somebody didn't know how to mix them,
yes,
that's a disconnect.
So we put really high-quality people there. So what I do is I build the session. I leave everything in from multi-tracks, but I turn off the parts that are being played on stage. So today we had 2 electric guitars, and I know the parts they're playing, so I turn that off in the tracks. I leave the others in. I play piano today, turned off the piano. I turned off drums, turned off electric bass. I leave synth bass in.
Okay.
And then I only leave on like gang vocals that are like big and not individual vocals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't want anything that's on.
So not like one female singing that alto part, but maybe like a choir in the background that just kind of adds to the bigness of a song.
Yeah. I totally get people's feelings of like, you want to be authentic on stage. So if we don't have an acoustic guitar player on stage, I don't have an acoustic guitar on the track. I try not to.
Yep.
Because sometimes if like we're doing Graves in the Gardens, that part is so iconic at the top end, right?
Yeah.
So I try not to do anything that's not on stage to be in the tracks. And then I trust, and we actually have it sent to the board down individual channels, stereo channels. So the sound guy is really in control of what gets into the house.
Wow.
So keys are separate, synths are separate, guitars are separate, bass, percussion.
So he's really mixing the tracks as the instruments that they are.
Yes.
Not just one left and right stereo mix.
Yeah, we have 16 channels from Ableton to the board.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, and I caught this in what you were talking about, you're using the tracks not as a crutch, but as an enhancer. I think that's the key when you're using multi-tracks on stage is like, because I've been in church scenarios where it's like, it's just a singer and maybe an acoustic, but then they have like drums and bass and sax and everything you can
Coming
imagine.
through the tracks.
And and it's like, okay,
probably feels weird.
It definitely feels like,
Karaoke.
so you have to use them as something that's going to enhance what you already have on stage. You guys do that really well. So when you're working with the musicians in your band, are you just pinpointing the parts for them to learn, or is it like, because I know, obviously like, and there's different ways to, plan out sets and whatnot. Planning center is probably like the bread and butter of most churches out there. You can kind of like load in a song and it will load in, electric 1, electric 2, bass and all that stuff. Are you just saying, hey, learn this part? Or is there a little bit of flexibility, like if they want to come in with like their own sounds? Because that was a big conversation in 2015 when we started using tracks at National Community. It was like, well, I want to come up with my own part. And then I would be like, well, you got to think about it.
Yeah.
Nigel from Hillsong was in the studio for 2 months. He's amazing, and he worked his butt off to come up with this part.
Yes.
So it may be the best part for the song. I don't know.
Yeah.
So how does that conversation go with your guys? Because great players here.
Yeah. I'm really proud of our team. They're so awesome. People can't believe that we're like a volunteer band. So
Well, okay, and we're going to talk about that too.
Cool.
So good.
So I make all of the isolated tracks personally for these songs. I don't know if it's something you pay for, but Planning Center doesn't up. One time I did Run to the Father, I put it in, and it just uploaded these rehearsal tracks for me, and I was like,
Yeah, I think it's a new thing that they just updated it with.
okay,
It's pretty rad.
I've only seen it happen once, but I make all my own, and I make it with our click and our cues, and I curate the parts to them, and I also do something it's pretty generous. We pay for worship online for our team. There was a couple at the time I started paying for it. There's like 2 or 3 of these companies that like to teach you how to play your worship songs. There's like worship together or worship community or something. I don't know. And then there's worship online. Mm-hmm. And so they seem to have more of the songs that we do. So I pay for it for everybody on the team.
Wow.
And it's something people can pay for themselves. It's probably $9 a month, but it's excellent. Shows you how to play the parts. And now when I make the isolated, when people hear this, they might think it's overkill, but clear is kind, as we like to say. Brene Brown said that, I think.
Ooh, say that again?
Clear is kind.
Clear is kind.
Because, how often have you been at rehearsal and they're like, I didn't know what you want me to do.
So good. Yeah.
Right? And so I have ultimate clarity. So I go and worship online, and I'm like, that's the guitar part they're going to show. So I make sure the track that's on Planning Center is that same guitar part. So you can watch it, you can listen to it. So every instrument, if you were on my Planning Center, you'd see EG1, EG2, acoustic, bass, keys, everything. And then I have the master practice track. This is the click the session you'll hear in your ears on Sunday and at rehearsal. It does 2 things for me. One, what do you want me to play? Here's exactly what I'd like you to play. Mm-hmm. And then 2, and this is when it comes to managing a team, if somebody shows up to rehearsal not prepared, I know it's not my fault.
Wow.
So then I start going, okay, well, tell me what's going on in your life, or what happened? Like, why are we not prepared? Because I also make sure they have everything 2 weeks out before rehearsal, which I know for some people sounds crazy.
Yeah,
We're pretty calendar-driven here at Mosaic. And then you asked me something else about, parts and individuality.
Yeah, just like bringing your own spice to it.
Totally.
What does that look like?
So I'm a huge advocate for improvisation.
Yeah.
I told you I have jazz drums. My master's is in jazz bass performance.
Wow.
I love improvisation, right? But
that just made me think of the Spinal Tap where they go in and do the freeform jazz odyssey. Come on, man.
I love improvisation, but it has to be used well. And one, you have to know how to do it.
That's a good point.
Because you do practice things so that your improvisation is excellent. Anyways, most people, they love to stick to their parts, and I always teach and coach people about, like, we're a pie piece. And when we come together for rehearsal, you occupy a very specific sliver of a pie. Mm-hmm. And everyone else has it too. As soon as we start stepping on other people's toes, you're stepping on other people's areas. Now, I do have guys on the team that are excellent improvisers, and they know how to handle themselves well. Yeah. And I do give them freedom to do that in specific ways. Sure. So that way they can contribute and they don't feel boxed in. Mm-hmm. But they all my team gets it, man. And like today you played with 2 very good guitar players. Yeah. And we kind of crafted out Wednesday of like, hey, here's an area where you can kind of throw in your own flavor, and same for this guy. That's cool. So we pick and choose.
Yeah, that's great. So, we were talking about this earlier, volunteer culture. Yeah. A lot of churches all across the country and even across the world, this is a conversation. I've been leading worship for 25 years. It's a conversation that's come up for just about 25 years. Yeah. Whereas, do we pay musicians? Do we have a volunteer culture? I've been in churches that do both, or maybe you pay this person who's, I just had a conversation with a worship pastor in Texas last night on my drive up here. And, they've got a guy who's played, 7 services in a month. It's volunteer culture, but he just sent him like a $50 Starbucks gift card just to say, hey, man, I appreciate you. We see you. Yeah. So I think there's ways that you can balance that. But how do you maintain morale and excellence in a volunteer culture? Like, there's this balance of like, well, we're volunteers, so I didn't have the time to learn this part. But, I think you also want to be a part of something that's good. Like, I was talking to somebody just the other week, and it was like, isn't it more fun to play in a band where you're all just crushing it? Yes. Like, instead of like, like, oh, well, just play whatever you want, and then it sounds awful, and everybody walks away like, that just wasn't fun. Yeah. So how do you maintain morale? And I know we're super practical on this podcast, but I love it because there's so many teams out there and bands out there that are wondering, wow, we have volunteers. How can we ask them to learn the parts and come in prepared when they're working 40-hour-a-week jobs?
Yeah, kids,
life is busy, of course, post-pandemic. Man, it's busier than ever before, it seems like. But there is this drive in all of us to be a part of something that's great. How do you guys do that so well here?
One of the things that drew me to Mosaic, and it's just part of our DNA, is a culture of care and honor. And you got a budget for it, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a big part of our team, and I inherited some of this too. I mean, shout out to Mike Winger, who managed this for years before we hired somebody. It's just care and culture, care and honor. You know, when you ask a lot, you should love on them a lot.
That's good. Say that again. That's really good.
If you ask a lot, you should love on them a lot. I mean, think of it like a bank account. You got to have deposits in order to make withdrawals.
Yeah.
And so if you're constantly withdrawing, you're going to burn that person out.
Wow.
But if you deposit a lot too, then you can make big asks.
Wow.
And so, you know, and the cool thing about our team is like we've been doing it for so long that it's just people, they just want to do. I mean, like you said, it feels good to play good music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at rehearsals, like when you want to show up, we have a culture of like you want to show up. Like I tell people, the song should be at like 95, 98%.
Wow.
And the last couple percent we'll work out together. But if you're like the weak link at rehearsal, like you kind of feel it. And it's not shame, and I'll talk to you off to the side, but it just, you don't want to be that guy, and you don't want to make it. I mean, with a band, if you're not prepared for rehearsal, you're letting each other down. You know, it's like a team, like sports.
Yeah.
Anyone who listens to this knows that I don't even watch sports. But let me tell you about sports.
What are they playing these days? Badminton?
Badminton.
Yeah.
But it's really all about care and honor.
Wow.
If I ask a lot of you, I'm going to follow up with you. And I work really hard. And, you know, if you're on my team and you're like, liar, I really try to get FaceTime with my guys and my girls. Obviously, we have to do the Billy Graham rule, so I have a third party. But, you know, I think that goes a long way, man. People want to be seen and heard. They want to know, hey, you worked really hard this week. Yeah, I did. Thank you for that.
Wow.
You know.
That's so key, and I think for anybody that's listening and working with teams, if you're the worship leader, worship pastor, or music director, knowing that you can't make the big ask if there's not the big care.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so key in this day and age because it gets so easy to just be task driven, and like you get in the flow, and week by week, Sunday always comes, and you get in that mentality of like, we need to get these songs great. But then, you know, people burn out. It seems like I talk to a lot of people who reach burnout, and there's no reason for that. Like we should be loving people in a pastoral way, caring for our teams. You guys do that really well here.
Well, a good leader too will tell a volunteer no for them.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Right? Like, hey, listen, Tommy, made up name. No one on my team is named Tommy. You have been serving 8 Sundays in a row.
Wow.
I know you have 2 little kids at home.
Yeah.
How about, well, we don't even need a second guitar player this week. We'll be fine. Like, sometimes you got to say no for people because they don't know how to. And the next thing you know, they're, like, mad at the church or mad at me. And it's just these little, you know, and this speaks to this whole thing. Mike Winger taught me this years ago, just about, like, course correction and vision. You know, if we have a vision of excellence and preparation and being able to say no, as soon as you see, like, a 1 degree separation from the vision, you got to tap that back into place. 1 degree... Fast forward 6 months is now 15 degrees.
Right.
1 year,
Yep.
They're not even hitting the target whatsoever.
Wow.
And so just this excellence and honor and the vision, we just keep people right on. It's like, you got to learn how to say no, man.
Wow.
And we use the blockout dates in Planning Center. I try to honor that as best as I can. Sometimes you go, hey, I know it's a blockout, but I could really use it.
Hey, what's a good rule of thumb, though, like to have people serve once a month, twice a month? What does that look like? The difference between burning out, where you're serving every weekend and you're doing Wednesday night youth and Tuesday night prayer and small group for this person and that. So it's like there's a degree of like burning out and just saying yes to everything. What's the ask to? But if you're only on once a month, it's hard to establish community in that because hey, I haven't seen you. You know, so what's kind of that like sweet spot where you kind of looking for somebody? Hey, can you serve X amount of times a month?
I most of the time let people dictate.
Yeah.
I've never prescribed, like, I want you to serve twice a month. And everyone has their own life. I have some guys in the team that have 4 kids. I have some guys in the team that are in high school still.
Wow.
So, obviously, naturally, a high school kid's probably going to have a little more time than a dad or a mom with a couple kids and a full-time job. So I let them dictate it. I mean, I send out that blockout thing from Planning Center. It's like, hey, and I have enough guys in the team that I can almost always fill it. Once every 3 months, I just ask, like, hey, any chance you can? But I make that ask with the right person. But I follow up. If I do make that ask, generally I'll have lunch with them or try to gift them with something. Just give them the love with the big ask.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, one last thing. I just want to say, any extra nuggets on the MD thing before we move on? Because I want to ask you a little bit about some other cultural things that you guys do here. Just another piece of advice, that nugget for an MD that you've learned along the way, maybe the hard way.
I'm wired this way, but I know some guys, Kamo, the guy I mentioned, he feels this too. It goes a long way, even if you don't have to be excellent at the instrument, it goes a long way to know about the instruments that you're leading. Because, I mean, all my drummers out there, someone goes, hey, can you do more of like a boom-ch, like thing? And you're like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah. What is that?
But if you're like, hey, can you give me more of like eighth notes on the hi-hat, maybe some kick drum on 2 and 4 and bass player, instead of the octave up, play it on like the E string.
Yep.
Those guys go, one, they'll respect you. 2, it's clear. And 3, like they'll follow you, right?
Wow.
But if you just do like those weird sounds, and if you don't know anything about their instruments, it just helps it. Know about a guitar player's pedal board.
Yeah.
Know about keys, pads.
Yep.
Know about bass stuff. You don't have to be proficient at it, but it just helps you talk to your team. Because, if you're a singer and you're trying to lead, you're rolling your eyes because they're like, I don't know, can we just have more energy?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, how do I bring that?
Right.
Well, what's interesting is like maybe you're listening and you're like, I don't know how to speak the language of a bass player. Here's where you start. You ask them about it.
Yeah.
Hey, so I'm on this song as you're learning. I love what you're doing. What are you doing? And you can find out a lot about that. I mean, I think there's just such a beauty in like having this hunger for learning. And none of us, I think, will ever arrive fully on this side of eternity. So we're always in the constant learn mode. And I think it's so key when you can talk the language of your band.
Yeah.
That's so good, man. Well, I want to ask you guys a little bit about, and I've seen this in Life Church. I've seen it here at Mosaic, where you guys integrate covers into your series. Now, we didn't do one today, but, I've been up here where we've covered Chris Stapleton, you've covered Maren Morris, and you've done different songs. So what's the thought process behind that? I know this church reaches a lot of unchurched people.
Correct.
I mean, your guys' tagline is a church for people who don't go to church.
Right.
But how have you seen that with your band, kind of owning those spots? And then to somebody that would say, well, I don't know if cover songs belong in church, what's your heart behind that? What's your thought process, and what's the results that you guys have seen from that?
Sure. Jonathan, our lead pastor now, he gave such a great vision on this years ago, and I was like, got it, I'm in. Of what did Jesus do when he taught? He taught, and what was the medium of the time? The medium of the
parables.
time was parables. It was storytelling.
Yeah.
And all of those storytellings had to deal with not church kingdom related stuff, farming, cleaning your house, your parable of the lost coin, dropping seeds. So they used the medium and the things that people were familiar with to teach a principle about God.
So good.
So our medium is different. It's pop culture. It's songs. It's graphics. It's all this stuff. So how can we take a song that already exists that people are familiar with, flip it on its head, and have it teach something about God?
Wow.
So that's what we do. Now, there's no power in cool. We say that. We don't do specials to be cool. We are very picky with what we do. And we're sensitive to the artists and what's going on in pop culture. It's like, maybe we shouldn't do a song from that person given a headline of late.
Right.
But, we just did a dating series. And so it's like, how about, that's an easy one, honestly, to fix songs.
So many songs.
So many, Harry Styles. We did some really great stuff. I combed through the lyrics. I combed through the content. The band loves it. I mean, shoot. And honestly, like, MDs out there, you want to have your band, like, just grow real quick. I mean, we know how difficult worship stuff is. The most difficult worship song is not that hard, right?
When you throw in a 2, watch out.
Hey. But these radio songs, I mean, that really teaches your band how to play some serious stuff.
Yeah.
You know? So that's our vision behind it, and we only do it when it undeniably ties into the sermon. And we would like to think, and I do think it happens, I know it happens, people are out there, they're on the road, and it comes on the radio, and they go, yeah, my pastor taught on this song the other day.
Oh, wow.
Makes them think about the sermon.
Huh.
The other thing it does is, we're a church where people don't go to church. They don't know what songs we're singing. Yeah. They're probably not singing along. And they might have their arms folded or their fists clenched, metaphorically. And that radio song, it's our goal to maybe have them loosen their hands a little bit. And
just disarms a little bit.
Yeah. I know that song. That's kind of cool.
Huh.
So that's why we do it. We've been doing it for as long as I've been going to Mosaic.
Yeah. It's so cool when you think about that. Jesus literally did use the pop culture of that time,
Yeah.
farming, agriculture, and
Yeah.
church planting, plant that seed.
Yeah.
It's like all of these agricultural terms that we still use 2,000 years later.
Yeah.
Go back to those moments. Another thing that you guys do here, and it seems like it's a very commonplace, like almost every service is you do baptism within the worship set.
Yeah.
What do those moments look like? Because I know, at our church, we maybe do, we'll have like 20 or 30 people sign up for baptisms like once a month. And so we'll have like 2 or 3 songs that kind of play as they're getting baptized out in our lobby. It's a different place, but you guys do it like right next to the stage.
Yep.
So how do you integrate, and this is just like best practices ideas kind of thing, but like choosing the right song for that baptism moment, and then going in and out. Cause I love that it's so seamless, and like there's a camera set up in front of the baptism tank, and it's like you call to the band, hey guys, we're gonna out of the second chorus, as the MD, because with the talk back mic.
Yep.
And that's something we can talk about too, is like just integrating the talk back.
Yeah.
What's talking too much, what's not talking enough. But just talk about that a little bit, like the baptisms thing, because you guys are a church that baptizes left and right. I love that people are getting saved here and coming to know Jesus. How does that integrate with the worship? Like it just goes so well together.
Sure. Yeah. Our former leader, Pastor Carl, great guy, built this church, amazing leader. He, he declared the win for our church. Anybody who read Andy Stanley's Deep and Wide, what is your win?
What's your win?
What's your win? Our win is baptism.
Wow.
Undeniably, theologically, it is our win. So, what do you communicate about your win? And this is just our win. I'm not judging how anyone does baptism, but if we declare that's our win, what are we communicating to people if we celebrate our win once a month? We want to celebrate it every week. Now, and listen, to those of you who are listening about baptism, we are very meticulous about how we come through people.
Yeah.
Like we ask a lot of...
prep them.
Yeah, a lot of tough questions. It's not spontaneous baptisms. It's not watered down. It's big. It's our biggest thing. So we want it in the middle of a song. And so I've learned over the years through hard lessons of like, there are songs that lend themselves better to it, and there are areas of the song too. And we learned this by trial and error. It's like we like coming out of a baptism with the chorus again or something big to celebrate, like loud, big, like this is awesome, man.
Yeah.
People getting saved. And there's a way it's easier to get into baptism. You crash down, it's fine. We're to the camera shot. But when someone comes up out of the water, then you don't want like the down bridge, right? And sometimes songs don't have those moments.
That's a celebration moment.
Yes, absolutely. They come out of the water, and then we're singing that chorus again. So I learned the hard way with that of like, oh, that felt weird, because we want people to celebrate. And so I built it my Ableton track, for those of you who are listening and who do Ableton. I build just like, we crash down on the song, and then I just have a 10-minute pad, because sometimes we have like 6 baptisms, sometimes we have 1.
Okay.
And then I have a keyboard firing, so when they come out of the water, I hit that, and it takes us to the next part of the song.
Got you.
And the pad is the filler, so that we never like lose.
That's really cool. So, not just baptisms, but communion. That's like a weekly thing that you guys do here too. And I would imagine it's kind of the same thought process, choosing communion songs. We did that at the church I planted in Nashville. We had communion every single week. So we would have a song that's kind of like geared towards the cross, geared towards mercy, forgiveness. How do you as a band not play too much that oversteps that moment, but has that it just goes well with it, whether it's communion, baptism, maybe you're playing under a message. What does that look like for you?
We have a similar service flow, as I'm sure most churches do, of just kind of musical go-tos that I, whatever key the next song is in. You'd be surprised, to back up a little bit. I might make people angry with this. Sometimes people say like led by the Spirit. Sometimes if there's more spontaneous moments that it's more spiritual. But we have a phrase here that we say that the Spirit is also present in the preparation. And
I just had somebody on the podcast that said the exact same thing. It's true.
I can't tell you how many times I've picked. Like I have the music picked through November for my team, and that Sunday John lands the plane on the sermon. We go into our last song, and I'm like, only God could have done this.
Wow. Perfect song, perfect
moment. And it's like, holy moly, the Spirit was present in the preparation too.
Wow.
But anyways, for the nuts and bolts, oftentimes I'm playing keys these days, and I listen to the pastor, and I kind of pad or play piano underneath as needed. We give them space for communion. We kind of have some rules, so to speak, scare quote rules, like drums just kind of don't work in those quiet areas.
Yeah.
Kick drum or cymbals, we try to stay out. And then even during baptism also. And it's, when you're doing communion, it's a private, intimate moment.
Yeah.
I either pick songs and or arrange songs so that when they're opening their eyes, they're taking a breath, they're ready to engage in worship. It's not like, bam, like the band is in.
Right. Jolting.
Yeah, we kind of like ramp it up and then back down for baptism and ramp it up. It's a roller coaster of dynamics. Dynamics are so important with the group.
That's a key part, because as you're listening to music, it's not all monotone. It's not all on the same. There's valleys, there's mountains.
Yep.
And as an MD, this is a great segue, because as an MD, a lot of times you're going to have a talkback mic. You're going to be able to tell your band, hey, we're going here.
Yeah.
Some MDs are like, hey, good luck this Sunday. They don't ever say anything for the rest of the set. Yeah. Others are like, hey, I'm going to call out every change, chorus, bridge. It's like almost doubling up what the cues say in the track.
Yeah, right.
So where do you find that balance? If you're listening and you're like, man, I want to rig up a talkback to be able to have those in the moment conversations with the guitar player or the piano player.
Yeah.
Or if you're if you're playing keys, to tell the drummer, hey, go to kick right here, build it up.
Yep.
What's that balance, and how do you do that here?
Yeah.
With the talkback mic? How do you use that?
Sure. So first of all, let me plug Optigate. Optigate is, I saw it on...
I feel like from this podcast, I need to get like 4 sponsorships here.
I know, Optigate. Hello, Curtis Parks. We do a hardwired mic, and what an Optigate is, I saw like some elevation rig rundown, and I was like, that's what I need. Because sometimes I MD from the drum set. And then naturally, it's picking up all the drums, and those people turn me way down.
Right.
So then when I have to whisper directions, nobody hears me. I'm
Wow.
like, what the heck, guys? So there's this thing called Optigate. You put it in between your microphone and the XLR cable, and it's a laser gate. So only when your face goes up to the microphone, it opens, so
Wow.
you can talk to people.
Yeah.
Back up, turns off.
Wow.
So there's no bleed, so MD's buy. It's a little pricey. It's like $250, but best thing I ever purchased.
Well worth it.
Well worth it. So we were talking about this earlier. I didn't mean to beef on people. I don't give too much direction. So I expect my guys to be memorized. We don't have music stands on stage. But I used to be an educator.
But praise God, you have confidence monitors
Hey-o.
for the singer that doesn't ever remember lyrics.
Yeah, I used to be an educator. I was an educator in private public schools for 10 years. If you are a crutch at all times for people, they don't memorize stuff. You train people not to memorize if you're constantly going 1, 4, 6.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, I want the big moments of the service to be special. So if there's hits, abnormalities of chord changes, or a special moment in a song, I'm going to communicate that every single time.
Yeah.
You mentioned something today, and I never thought about it before. You were like, hey, can you shout out the keys before we do it? Because you were just moving your capo a bunch. And I was just
As
like...
every acoustic player does.
Yeah. And at first I was like, Curtis, come on. And then in my head I was like, you know what? You have a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
You're leading, you're worshiping, your body language. It's like, I'll shout out the keys for you. And I was like, that's a good idea. But I don't want to be a crutch for people.
Yeah.
And because the more that people, like if they're not prepared and they're relying on your MD notes, they're not fully present on stage.
Wow.
So I want my team to be like super prepared so that they can experience what God's doing in the room.
Yeah.
Not just be a tool, but also worship themselves.
Wow.
So the more they're prepared, the more they are engaged with the service, the more they're worshiping. So all that to say, my MD stuff, I am between not a lot and medium, right?
Yep.
You heard me
Just
today.
enough.
Just enough. Like, hey, there's hits here. Don't forget the hits. Because the hits are important. Or, hey, there's a 3 chord here, which is not like in verses 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Like that type of stuff.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Hey, last thing I want to ask you.
All right.
Production, worship, those are usually 2 teams that work so constantly together, and yet, in the church world, sometimes we don't always have the best communication, or like, hey, why would the feedback, or hey, why didn't you play, or you missed this cue, or this and that. How? What's the advice that you could give any worship team member out there on just synergizing and staying unified, worship and production teams together, and how you talk to one another, and how you honor one another, and how you work together?
One thing we've done, and maybe churches do it differently, but we have a green room. That's the production green room. So between services, during services, we don't generally see production people during the service because while we're off stage, they're doing cameras and stuff. But between services, we hang out.
Yeah.
And we have fun. And my team has fun.
Yeah.
I'm a nut in there, man. I try to keep the energy high. I love to laugh. We love to laugh. And so our production and band, like we know each other by name, and we talk to each other. We laugh. Key. Yeah, it's really great. I think it was like an unintentional thing that Mosaic has always done. And when I look back, because when you're saying like, man, sometimes teams have a division, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
We just always hung out together.
Wow.
Between services.
That's awesome.
That's one of the things that, like, we used to do. We were in a small room. We did 5 services a weekend.
Wow.
And you'd rub shoulders so much with your team. And once we went to 2 services, I'd see my guys on Sunday and be like, I miss you.
Oh, man.
Like, I miss you.
Yeah.
Because we hung out so much in the green room. And so that's one of the things. You asked this earlier, and I forgot to answer it, which is I'm intentional, and my band is intentional too. We're friends. Like when we're there on Sunday, we go up on stage.
Yep.
The band always hangs out in the room as people leave, and they come up on, oh, what pedal are you using? Oh, cool, look at that, man. So they're always hanging out, always coming up and talking to us on stage.
That's key, man. Just create that community, that culture of hanging out.
Yeah, man.
Not just coming here to do a task, but coming here to, you're my bud, man.
Yeah, and do life.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
Tyler, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks, Curtis.
You've been listening to Worshipology with Curtis Parks. To learn more and to find resources for worship leaders and teams, you can visit curtisparks.com.